We track media coverage because it's fast and easy to see. But coverage only tells you how you showed up, not what your audience actually thinks. I talked with CARMA's Maria Talakina about closing that gap and why it's easier than most communicators assume. So, Maria, as we're thinking about evaluating the effectiveness of our communications programs, we all think about looking at things like, what is our media coverage? What's the tone and sentiment and our key messages being picked up? But I think one of the things that can really benefit organizations as they're looking at their PR programs is market research around it. So not just the media coverage, but more understanding of audience perceptions. So I know this is a particular specialty of yours, and so I'd like some of your perspective on how we can begin to think about that as communicators, particularly if maybe that's not something that we've spent a lot of time with previously.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly interesting subject. It's an interesting subject to me personally. I've spent all of my career in market research, and that's really close to my heart. And when I at the beginning of my career, I served to marketing people, and we all know that market research is more of a discipline that marketers use, but less of by PR and communications professionals. Now I changed the industries being inside the new world of PR and communications professionals. I'm really happy to see that it's something that picks up and it becomes exciting. It becomes the point of focus. And I don't want to overshadow or say that media analysis is something that is of less importance. If anything, it actually is not. It's important to measure how you land. It's important to measure your share of voice. It's important to measure your messaging and how are you portrayed, but it's also equally important to take it a step farther. And this is where the market research or audience opinion plays the role. This is where you can use these instruments. And I think when I was getting ready for a different webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I started looking at where the PR and comms measurement really originated from, or where it all has started. And one of the first the mentions of the measurement itself in the world of PR and comms was it happened in 1944, so not that long ago, but also quite long ago at the same time, right?
Right.
Think about it. But what was interesting to me is that the idea of how PR and comms should be measured back then was presented in Public Opinion Quarterly. It's a magazine that back then, very reputable magazine. And it said, if you want to measure the effectiveness of your campaign, the PR and communications campaign, you should be looking at not only how it lands in the media, but also how it lands or remembered or exposed to your target audience. So this is where the concept of market research is coming into, right? So we're not looking at campaign or anything that we communicate only from the perspective of how it lands in the media, which is our vessel of communication. This is what we use to communicate, but also it's important to know whether or not the people who I want to speak to actually have been exposed to the message, whether
Right.
they have resonated with that message, and whether they have understood or it changed their opinion, perception, or it pushed them to do certain action. So it originated back in 1944, and only now we start picking it up a little bit more. And we all know of the AMIC evaluation framework. It constantly talks about measuring yourself beyond the outputs, but it's still something that a lot of communicators are a little bit more hesitant to do. My point is that market research is actually not a scary instrument. It's
Right.
it's not expensive instrument in the first place. It doesn't take ages. As much as we progress in technology in many different fields, market research also progresses a lot. So it becomes very fast these days. We can use different methodologies. It could on average take even 4 to 5 days to turn around a simple survey. It doesn't cost tens of thousands of dollars. So why not to start using it?
Right. And we'll get to the mechanics in a little bit more detail in a minute here so that people understand sort of how it all works. But I think, one of the key things that you've touched on here is understanding whether the media coverage is actually being absorbed and swaying the audience that you're trying to reach, because the media is sort of the intermediary, if you will, in what
Yeah.
we're doing. It's the easiest thing for us to measure and see, because we can easily track that in virtually real time. But there's a risk that some communicators are seeing it as a proxy for what their audiences are thinking. And I know that in a lot of the research that we've done at CARMA, there's a clear disconnect between what the media perception might be and what the audience perception is. And so you need to understand both, right, if you're going to be an effective communicator.
Exactly that. And you're absolutely right. And I think it's such an interesting area as well to either prove that media and public are aligned or actually find those differences, because in these differences, sometimes you can find the opportunity to pivot, opportunity to grow, opportunity to even reposition yourself, because what you see competitors are doing differently, and that might be either working or not working, but only through this you will be able to see that. Because if all of us communicate in the same way, in any given industry, companies utilize the same media outlets, they utilize the same journalists, they utilize the same platforms, different forms of content. Messaging might be different. This is what we can control, but we're all fighting for the same almost piece of the pie when it comes to using those mediums to communicate with people. But then the difference is how what I say, at what time I use different mix, if you will, to then lend it well with the audience. But if I'm only looking at, all right, perfect, I've hit New York Times, I've hit um, many different, let's say, outlets in my target media list. Fantastic, I'm doing the right job. But then how does it differ to somebody else who's doing exactly the same job? Are they landing better in people's head because they're saying something different and that actually resonates with them? That's only working if we measure that.
Right. And where you find disconnects between what the audience perceives and what the media is reporting or receives, that asking the why from there helps you to improve your overall strategy going forward. Because I think we all need to remember that measurement is, while it is fundamentally a snapshot in time or backward looking, it is intended to help us improve our future communications, and not simply say, this is what happened, and kind of move on and do our own thing anyway.
Exactly that. It's great to, pat yourself on the back and say, I've done a fantastic job, but you also need to learn from it. You need to grow from it. And that's what actually media measurement is for. It's good to have a reward, but it's also good to use this data and these insights to really understand, okay, what can I do differently? Am I doing something wrong, or I'm doing something right? I need to keep that, but maybe I need to focus on that a little bit more. There's so much differences that we see between how people see certain things and think about them versus how media communicates about them or companies communicate about them. And it really is a wide array. I mean, obviously, political discourse. There's a huge gap between what people actually read, care about, and how they see certain things, starting from, countries, national reputation, as a public, what do they care about, versus what media communicates about the same countries, or the countries communicate about themselves, all the way down to crisis. It's actually quite interesting to see that for you as a company, seeing a huge spike in the media, seeing a lot of negativity is a big deal. It's a crisis, and where you in a crisis, you tend to perceive things much bigger than they are. Sometimes they might in fact be as big as you think, but that reality check gives you the opportunity to see, is it actually, and that is the thing that you can only do through asking people, as simply as have you heard that something happened with a company A, or somebody said a certain thing about the company? What do you think about that? Does it actually impact how you see that company? Because a crisis in the media, as much as it could be big, and it has to be addressed, it has to be controlled, or you need to pay some attention and do the efforts, but at the same time, with the audience, it might not be as bad sometimes. Or actually, there are certain pain points that audience really is sensitive about that you're not addressing well, and you would never know about these pain points unless you ask people.
Right. So what I hear you saying is that market research really allows you to get outside of the bubble that exists between you as a communicator and the media that you're talking with on a regular basis, and understand what really matters outside of that. Is it what you think does? Is it something different? Is it? And I think particularly your point of being able to understand what's a big deal to the audience versus what's a big deal to you. I mean, we've all as communicators been in that situation where we see some story and we're like, oh my God, this is awful, this is terrible, and stakeholders are up in arms about it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really move the audience to change their perspective, and so it's maybe not as important as we thought it was initially. So the market research helps us to understand that difference.
Absolutely. And I want to say that sometimes we as communicators also coming back to the things that you said at the beginning, um, we have a certain image, or we can perhaps sometimes interchange a market research or a survey with other mediums that we do, such as social listening, saying, I've done social listening, I actually done some market research, I know what people say, which actually has a point. But at the same time, again, if we're coming back to imagine we're in a crisis and there's a lot of negativity happening in the media, what I decide to do is I decide to do a social media listening and see what people actually say on the social media as a proxy to then understand whether or not it resonates with people. The likability that I'll see a lot of negativity in the social media as well is very high. And that will
Right.
confirm my fears. Oh my God, it actually is as big as I thought it is. And, the world is ending. But at the same time, if you take a step back from it and think about social media, what is it actually? Social media is a platform for people to voice their opinions. Obviously, we're talking about mostly user generated content. But where is this content originates from? And are the people who voice their opinions or generate the content represent my target audience, represent the public or any sort of uh, demographic split that I'm
Right.
speaking to? Because social media is a platform for the extremes in a way. I'm extremely happy I'm posting about it. I'm extremely angry I'm posting about it. When I don't have an opinion or I'm actually quite neutral about it, I'm not going to bother and post about something, but it still is an opinion that I hold. So I might not even care about what's happening with the brand at the moment, or how big the news are blowing up about certain thing, because I frankly don't care about that, for example. But people who post on social and actively discuss that are the more extreme, kind of they're opinionated a little bit more, they're a little
Sure.
bit more active. And so only looking at social media and then thinking that I've done my research and this is what audience actually thinks is also a little bit foolish in this case, because I might get myself in a much worse mental state than it actually is.
Sure. So it might be better than doing nothing, or maybe it just stresses you out. But I
Yeah,
mean, so what I hear you saying is that by doing market research, you're able to hear from what we might call the silent majority, as opposed to just the passionate activists on either end of the spectrum, and their opinions. And
exactly.
so I do want to come back to before we run out of time here, the concept of market research doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be expensive, because I do think that a lot of communicators come to it from that perspective. That may be because they're old like I am. And, when I was, first in communications, and we were, doing surveys 30 plus years ago, it was a cumbersome process. It was very labor intensive. So that made it very costly. It required a lot of effort to conduct, and a lot of effort to plan. You still need to plan. You still need to put a process in place, but it's a lot easier today. And to your point earlier in this conversation, there have been a lot of enhancements, innovations, evolutions in market research in recent years that do make it much more accessible. So talk to me a little bit about how, if I'm in an organization, we've never done market or audience research to understand how our messages are hitting. How do we begin to do it, and what kinds of budgets are we thinking about in this regard?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. The amount of progress that has been made in terms of technology and the ways about, interviewing people in different shapes or forms, it has extremely advanced these days. If back in the, again, like 1940s, 1950s, all the way up to 2000s, we had to go and knock on the door and face people and ask them, could you please answer a couple of questions? And it was a very long process in the first place. It was a very costly process, labor intensive. It's not like these days. There are surveys that literally sent throughout the customer journey. Sometimes you're in the shop and then you receive a pop up to answer a survey, and you do because you can get a 10% voucher out of this shop you're in. That could be as easy as that. When you scroll on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you also occasionally get invitations to the survey, and that could stimulate you to then do something else or receive a certain reward for it. So we all went from, a very completely kind of manual process, labor intensive process, all the way for the process to be more gamified, and it's purely digital. It's something that is easy for people to do on both ends, from the setup perspective all the way to the end user actually answering the questions. And that made it also cheap. So speaking of budgets, a survey could start from, $4,000, $5,000. And if you think about it, it's not a huge budget if it helps you to make a critical decision. By critical decision, I'm saying whether or not I should go after a certain celebrity because I'm thinking about deploying that person for or being an ambassador for my brand or my campaign. Who do I choose? What message do I need to put out there for the next quarter or next year? These are very crucial decisions that actually might save or might take $millions out of your company, and spending, a couple $1,000s actually make it way more worth it to be able to make an informed decision based on data. So it could start from $4,000. It could go up to, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It depends
Sure.
on the complexity, the scale, but we always recommend, first of all, you start small. If you're a company who never deployed market research, start small. Starts with a market of your interest. You might operate in the UK, but also 5 different markets. Start with the UK. Starts with where you are. You know this market. If you have certain prejudice towards market research, doing it in the market that you know the best of also could help you navigate and understand whether or not you're getting results that you're thinking about, how much you trust them in the first place, how much it contextualizes the market that you know. So you can clearly see more value rather than doing it in the market that you know less of. That would be my my recommendation. It also could be a very quick survey in terms of you don't have to overload it with, tens of different questions, 30 questions about everything you could possibly think of asking. Don't disperse yourself. Don't involve too many team members to contribute. Stay laser focused on the objective that you're looking for. Now, I'll give you an example. One of just literally recent surveys that we've done today was about a Netflix show, one of the Netflix shows, and that show prominently features landscapes of a country and ultimately feeds into national branding. That country is portrayed in the show, and the purpose of that also to increase interest in the country, to increase the likelihood to travel to that country. So a survey literally had 7 questions in it, and it was turned around in 2 days, starting from, have you seen that show? How did you hear about this show in the first place? Have you noticed the country's landscape? Um, how was it? How would you rate that?
Right.
Has it made you more interested in the country of question? Has it made you being more likely to consider this country for to travel? And then you use this information and contextualize it with additional elements such as, again, media coverage behind that show, how much that show actually spiked the conversation in the media, really promoted the country through these medium, but also you have these 7 questions to anchor yourself into how it actually then landed in the eyes of people. And that is 2 days worth of work and just a couple of $1,000s, nothing more than that.
That's great, and I think you've handed our listeners a lot of really useful things over the past 20 minutes. We've begun to understand how market research can really help you from your communication strategy and evaluation. It's not a scary thing. It doesn't have to be an expensive thing. I think your concluding advice there, which is keep it simple, is really helpful, and that's true whether you're an organization who has used market research before or who hasn't. There's often this temptation to overcomplicate and ask too much, and it drives up cost and it drives down value. So keeping it simple is always good advice. And I think you've opened up a lot of topics, and so I'm sure we'll have some future conversations where we can dive deeper on some of them. But I really appreciate you taking the time to help us to demystify market research in the context of PR and communications. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. Appreciate the platform and spending time with you.